Hello? Can you hear now? Hello? Hello? Can you hear?
Chris?
Hello? Can you hear?
I don't hear any sound either. I can't hear any sound on YouTube. Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
You can't hear. Sorry. Hello? Can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Sorry, technology issues. Uh, yeah, my name is Natu, and I'm a data engineer by day, and like I'm a volunteer at Omdena um, by night. So I'll be presenting on Omdena as an innovation platform for building AI solutions to real world problems through collaboration. So Omdena is basically an initiative to solve real world AI problems with volunteers that gather for a specific challenge online and completely distributed from all over the world. And basically, my presentation will have like two takes. Basically, like the first component is describing Omdena and how it works, and I'll dive deep into a specific project around a PTSD challenge that I was participating as a machine learning engineer. So yeah, let's go. So at this moment, like there are around 863 volunteers at Omdena from 77 countries and building at least more than 10 projects so far for different organizations, and everything is basically run in a volunteer manner. And basically, each challenge has around 50 participants, and each of the participants is a, 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 a machine learning aficionado or a machine learning enthusiast in order to learn and dedicate its time to to the to the to social oriented challenges. So Omdena has worked in collaboration with the UN Refugee Agency and World Food Program and Safe City and a couple of other like social driven organizations in order to create AI prototypes, AI systems to solve real world problems. So basically, the challenges run every 2 months. Team of 50 engineers selected all over the world, volunteers, and they collaborate and solve the problem. So the mantra is building AI for good by the people for the people. Uh, so this is an example of what a partner like the World Food Program has felt with Omdena, and they actually were trying to like was a project in Nepal trying to predict crop in a different area in order to predict like potentially areas where they would have hunger in countries, so they can just proactively like devise policies and initiatives in order to mitigate those issues. Uh, so there was another challenge around like wildfire detection. This was like mid last year when the Amazon fires were super trending in general in the world for all the problems that everyone knows, all the climate related problems. So Omdena partnered with like a small startup that was creating this detection technologies in Brazil and could just like with the power of the crowds like improve their own systems and algorithms and provide the solutions to the community. So there, it's mainly a movement according to some of our partners like the UNHCR because everything is basically built from a community perspective, and there are no like guidelines or blueprints. So like a team that's assembled problem is kind of defined as a blurb, and the team starts like coming up with solutions and asking questions around and trying to investigate solutions to these different problems. Um, just like explaining a bit the process is an AI challenge is announced. For instance, I'll give you examples here. So one of the projects was preventing sexual harassment in India, and the description of the problem is as as it's not very clear here, but it's just very broad. So help to build a solution or create awareness of street harassment and abuse in India, and what kind of solutions could be created with like this techniques, AI techniques or machine learning techniques. And another one was analyzing social media to prevent violent acts in a specific region. So the problems start very broad with a team of 40 plus engineers, and people generally have to come up with like a refined problems statement. And most of the times data is not available, so data needs to be sourced from public or like research institutions, and from there like model development starts. But like generally multiple models, and models are curated, and like in the end like a solution is discussed and delivered to the partner organization. So this is how it works at a high level, and I'll now dive deep into a specific project that I participated like mid last year, like around September. So the project was also like broadly defined. So it was like basically proposed by a guy called Chris Todberg. So he works with refugees all around the world, and he had personally felt PTSD because he was a victim of a guerrilla attack in Central African Republic, and he started to get more awareness around PTSD on the people that he was working with because he was a victim of PTSD, and he started working on that area with refugee camps all over the world, and he created an organization around it. So what he wanted is like, is there any tool that can be created to mitigate PTSD, or to obviously diagnose and mitigate PTSD in some way with the abundance these days of artificial intelligence technologies. So that was the problem. So as you guys might know or not, so most of the PTSD victims have little to no access to service like therapists, particularly on these settings. We're talking about Syria and like Central African Republic, Somalia, and potentially even South Africa. So like it's a disease that's generally not detected. And what we wanted on this particular challenge is like, is there anything that can be done with a group of like enthusiasts, like, and people like from different backgrounds? So we had psychologists, people with some background in PTSD and in psychology. We had like mathematicians, and we had graduate students, and we had like random teenagers that knew a lot about computing and deep learning and AI. And we had like engineers as well, and like people from all over the world. Like I can count Mexico, US, Mexico, US, Serbia, people coming from Portugal, Morocco, Tanzania, and different places. And basically we organize ourselves around Zoom was very much used, like from like a task perspective, task organization, and like we spent like just before the lockdowns we were already like working like in a distributed way with Zoom. So the first thing was like coming up with this high level approach, like let's create a conversational chatbot for PTSD risk assessment and potentially mitigation. So like it was kind of open-ended in the beginning, as I mentioned, that this is generally how like Omdena tasks do start. And yeah, so multiple groups started with different, we used GitHub to organize our kind of like initial research and like trying to discuss these different things. So like people investigated different techniques, like specific on the area. We had some supervision or some mentorship from a psychologist that was within the team. So we looked at things like behavioral treatments, eye movement therapies. I was and also like trying to research on conversational like algorithms, and trying to see what people do out there. Like there was a lot of literature research and trying to figure out what could we do. So like at the same time, like, so there was like the research component on trying to find modeling techniques. There was a team that was dedicated to refine the problem. And there was a third team that was dedicated on finding relevant data sets. So finding data sets on this particular project ended up being like a huge problem. So as I said before, like, so there were no relevant public data sets. And also, like, within the team, we had these discussions or like of ethical issues on trying to create a solution. Like, will we replace psychologists? Like, are we, like, this is that was kind of unthinkable. Can AI actually treat or even dependently diagnose patients? So, and other barriers that were discussed were around privacy issues as well. So there's a, like, and it's a current trend as well, like the privacy issues with patient data. So given all these barriers, one of the things that the teams did decide was to actually reduce the scope of the problem. Like, we can't solve all the problems in the world. So after some thought and based on the data that we had access, like, it was decided to do like a screening tool that, although it's a very simple tool, using obviously ML and or possible AI algorithms to classify transcripts, and that ended up being the vector of attack to this problem. So and obviously, like, because like also like the lack of data sets that we had, like, this ended up being the only thing that we could do. But I'll just detail this a bit more. So, like, yeah, after, like, basically on the middle of the challenge, we finally got access to some data to one of our team members that is a university researcher. He had to go through a lot of like administrative approval processes. So there was actually a published data set from his university around transcripts of like psychological therapy that included a section on PTSD. So this kind of like in some way saved the project, like from being like completely only theoretical to have some more relevance with real data. And he did great work on like anonymizing the data correctly and extracting the data that was needed for the process. So we ended up, all the teams ended up going to, there was a specific annotation team that used basically standard techniques on the DSM manual, like I think it's disease classification manual. And from there, like, the annotation process was created, but like, again, it's a risk assessment. It's not it's basically to predict a risk, whether there's a risk of the patient given a transcript having a specific, a higher risk of having PTSD. So that was kind of like the idea of this, ended up being the idea of the final kind of like iteration of this project. And yeah, that was the hardest part of the project. So like, it was basically picking this dialogues and trying to figure out a way to classify according to the DSM manual, and basically based on the psychologist that was kind of guiding the project, we found a way to classify and assess risk in some way. But it's basically a screening tool. It's actually not like a medical tool or like there's no pretensions on that. And this is a completely POC. It shouldn't be used, like, it needs to be refined. It's a good idea, but it needs to be refined. So yeah, so as I mentioned, like, training provided by psychologists on the team, more than 50 transcripts, but like, we say 50 transcripts, but we had around like 2,000 lines on each transcript. So each line had to be annotated manually. So basically, we're talking now then like 100,000 lines hand manually based on DSM-5 criteria for PTSD risk. And this annotated transcripts form the initial training set for machine learning models. So obviously, we had regarding like mentorship and like help as well. So we ended up trying a couple of things like GPT-2 to summarize the transcripts, but it ended up not working well. Fit was suggested to us exactly by the creator of the algorithm, Sebastian Ruder, and he actually had a chat with one of our team members, and he kind of like suggested like Fit as a possibility. And we ended up, after testing traditional machine learning methods and Fit. So just showing a bit like how this collaboration works. So we had obviously Slack and things like that, and there's like a different team member just like tested the new technique and shared with everyone, and people worked on top of it. So most of the between GitHub and Slack, these were the main kind of tools used in order to coordinate the work between all the members of the community. So we had a group investigating ML models, we had a group of software engineers looking at chatbots, another group looking at data sets, and we had another group looking at data annotation, and we had specific groups for specific type of models. Cool. And these are just a summary of the techniques tried, and we try to document most of it in GitHub with all of the collab notebooks, and the different code is also available on GitHub and open source for whoever wants to look at it. Yeah. And so and this was the final revised goal of the project. So the team collectively decided that we couldn't do everything that we wanted, and we needed to reduce our scope of action to assess the risk given all the ethical issues that were there. And we decided that risk assessment was a good trade-off between all the problems that we wanted to solve in the beginning and what we could do with the data that we had and for our different stakeholders. And this was the technique that we used. I can just glance at it. So this talk is not very let's say research oriented. So but let's say we ended up using transfer learning with GLAM fit. So we had a pre-trained language model with Wikipedia. We could use we could fine tune on unlabeled data. So most of our data was unlabeled to find the language model, and then we could add in the end a text classifier. So this was basically transfer learning on NLP. It's kind of a standard technique these days, but was not as simple back in the days. And this is another description of the same technique. That's basically first part is using a pre-trained model, and then obviously fine-tune with the transcripts that were not annotated, and then adding a classifier in the head of the neural network created on the language model fine-tuning. And yeah, and one thing that we used to augment the data was back translation. So that was what the Slack message that I showed described. So we translated it to Hindi, French, and a couple of other languages, and we translated that in order to augment the data. So on this particular problem, we found that data availability and the problem definition, a clear problem definition, are an important thing for this kind of community-driven challenges. And we got 80% of accuracy on the baseline classifier. But this is very baseline, very it's a POC. It's an idea for the sponsor organization to move on and build a proper scalable and reliable tool, and obviously investigate more on that. Yeah, and using few shot transfer learning with back translation seemed very promising for situations where you don't have a lot of data. And yeah, prototypes and all the research was transferred to the partner organization. A lot of articles were produced by different team members, Medium articles. So it was a great learning exercise for more than 40 people with different levels, from postdocs in machine learning to high schoolers, and was super exciting. And yeah, so this was basically the PTSD challenge, the deep dive. I can speak a bit more about other challenges that Omdena is worked on. So on challenges around classifying, but with the same approach of independent teams and with a self-learning approach, and getting into a solution to with the motivation of having a partner organization on the side that sometimes might provide data, and sometimes even data scientists as well. So one of the challenges was classifying crops and to allocate resources more efficiently. So this is kind of some of the results. And there was also a challenge. I think this was related with fire prediction. So trying to detect trees close to power stations to assess the risk of fires on that area. So this is the sentiment analysis, a sentiment analysis challenge. And we had another one, a very interesting one, around conflict displacements in Somalia with United Nations Refugee Commission. Yeah, and obviously the one that I mentioned around preventing sexual harassment by finding the safest route. So basically, this was a very interesting application of AI, and those machine learning techniques that are available these days. So the collaboration here was with a non-profit organization called Safe City, that they already had an app with hotspots for criminality, but they added a feature to actually find a safe route for a vulnerable person, being in this case a girl or children, on these dangerous areas. And that was like a very interesting use of deep learning and this collaborative approach to solve this pressing societal problems. And yeah, that's it. So in summary, we believe that by using this Omdena approach, we can build more faster and more efficient, with more ethical AI, and we can actually test multiple models faster and working obviously with global talent. So basically around so the fact that you can have multiple people working at the same time, and a lot of the volunteers are actually experts in the area. So we can have multiple models for problems that were previously neglected in some way. For instance, like safety problems. This is not a particularly profitable problem. It's more around societal benefits. And obviously there's some structure with the fact that you have peer reviews and obviously mentors available, and some quality can be enforced, and the team is very small. So it's basically 4 people managing 900 people. So it's super interesting what they can do with the power of volunteers on solving problems all across the world. And yeah, that's it. And Omdena, if you have ideas for challenges or you want to participate in challenges, it's a great opportunity to learn and obviously if you are a non-profit organization or a societal an organization with societal challenges, you can use it, and you can have the crowd helping you solving social impactful problems. And that's basically it on my side. Thank you very much. So stop streaming now, and I'll be answering questions on Google chat.